Okay, so welcome everyone. Alon Saban, Hub Security, VP of Corporate Development. Welcome to our one-on-one with Ian Thornton-Trump. Ian will introduce himself in a few minutes. We are going to discuss cyber threats, solutions, state of play, who's doing what, and who are the players on the game, motivations, way they think, and more. Maybe a short introduction about myself. As stated, Alon Saban, VP of Corporate Development in Hub Security. For the last 21 years, I've been in the IDF, cyber elite units. I was on the defense side of the house. We have a national unit called the Matzov. That's the National InfoSec unit. I've been there for around 18 years out of the 21 years in the IDF. Amazing times, and I'm happy that I got the chance to be there and to do all the stuff that I did. I'm looking forward to the discussion. Ian, maybe a few words about yourself.
Sure. Well, thank you very much for having me. It's really my pleasure to be in such distinguished company. I'm the CISO for Cyjax, a threat intelligence company located here in the UK. We obviously work in cyber threat intelligence, but in a broader sense as well, looking at geopolitical and social media and all of the type of things that put together a comprehensive view of threat actors. I come from a military background as well, with 13 years of service in the Canadian Armed Forces. And I was an intelligence operator back in the day when there was a Soviet Union, but apparently that's coming back right now. From there, I've been a military police officer, and then finally a public affairs officer, which was easily the best job in my military career. It was amazing. So I'm delighted to join you here. And I think, you situated the situation quite well, like in the early beginnings here, where we're going to talk about the threat actors. We're going to talk about the motivations right now. And obviously, the geopolitical climate across Europe has dramatically changed in the last couple months. There is a war in the Ukraine, and it seems to be very split along the Western nations, considering that a giant global Russian cyber war is imminent. I've been pretty staunchly saying I don't think that will happen for a number of different reasons that maybe we can get into some of those. But what is the Israeli perspective on Russia's move, and is there a heightened level of alert as a result of Russian aggression?
Well, that's a great question. I think I actually wrote a blog post on it. Anyone who listens can review the site. But I think the Russian-Ukraine conflict, or let's be even more blunt, war, stressed out that often cyber becomes a legitimate action that a nation state can attack another nation state, a part of an overall offensive action, both in the physical world and in the logical world. I think every nation that has an arm and a leg with Russia is keeping up its guards and make sure that it is familiar with the threat that it has from the Russian side. We see that in many cases, Russia is not hesitating to fulfill any capabilities in its own, whether it is closing the gas pipeline, whether it is calling the UN Security Council, like what we are seeing in the last couple of days, and whether it is cyber operations or even cyber threats, the model that you are using cyber as a red button, meaning that you have all of the infrastructure, the offense infrastructure placed, and you want to wave at someone, telling, I know what you're doing, be careful, I'm gonna press the button and you're gonna lose the electricity, you're gonna lose money, something bad will happen to your communications or any other capability placed. Everyone is doing that. The Russia and Ukraine war has actually brought it to the center and to the light. So I think I'm not playing that game of what Israel as a nation is doing anymore, but I guess any nation that has an arm and a leg is highly alerted and is watching its back really good.
Yeah, I think it's really important to underscore a couple of things that you said, Alon, because I think one of the first things is Israel in its geographic position has been watching what happened during the Arab Spring and the Assad regime, who invited Russia basically into their midst to support the activities of the Assad regime against the Free Syrian Army. That has been playing out for more than 10 years nearby. So obviously, there would probably be a heightened sensitivity towards Russian aggression in general, but there are certainly other regional protagonists that have cyber capabilities as well. What we're seeing over in Europe, though, is especially from our commercial clients, a lot of nervousness around their own infrastructure and their own exposure. Anonymous has come in and threatened a number of major European brands because they were maybe unclear about how they were going to continue business operations in Russia. In sort of all of the sanctions that are coming out. In some cases, those brands are still trading because they're private franchises and they're not beholden to corporate direction, for instance, right? So they're private businesses that happen to have North American logos or logos on them. So given that, and given sort of like the general state of affairs, we're now seeing scams and cyber criminal activity. Now, cyber criminal activity has always been background noise. I mean, it's always going on. I think we saw it uptick during the pandemic pretty impressively. Are there sort of like the same types of scams that are hitting, the Middle East as that we see in America and Europe, or is there a different sort of characterization to it? Because here it's all about ransomware. It's all about preventing ransomware, which, as you and I both know, is an outcome of poor security and not necessarily a threat. That is something tangible that you can touch and say, I have ransomware protection. No, you have robust security so you don't get ransomware.
That's I think, every once in a while you hear some kind of someone is taking his observation on something, ransomware or any other stuff, and you say, okay, I'm going to use that. So very well put. I maybe just to open a bracket, I heard someone describe the cloud as someone else's computer, which is an amazing description to what it actually is when you look at it from the high of the security beholder. But maybe if I'm taking your questions or your remark to a more broader sense, I think today the threat models are changing.
Yeah.
In the past, we had the script kiddies, we had the 1 days, the 2 days, the people were not patching, the cyber awareness was very, very low in the sense that it's working, don't touch it.
Right.
So today, the cyber awareness is relatively high, and the walls are getting higher, and organization, and talking about central IT capabilities. We can talk about OT differently. The walls are getting up and up and up, and the awareness not only of cyber threats, but also the effect of a cyber attack is huge, which actually makes it pretty hard for attackers to commute the attack. Now, the thing that happens that attackers are becoming pretty good as well, in the sense that you see a lot of script kiddies, which actually don't succeed very much. They do succeed, but not as they succeed in the past. And you see cyber crime organizations, which is actually have a very operational mindset. They want to gain money, they want to gain IP, they want to gain capabilities, they want to attack and hurt someone, disable some kind of business processes and capabilities. And they work in an operational mindset in the sense that they are building a stream of the attack. They are building the tools that they need to build. They're collecting the intelligence. They know what they're up against, and they do whatever they can to actually commence their attack and gain the initial capabilities that they wanted to gain. Now, what I just described really resembled espionage, in the sense that today it is safe to assume that nation states, and actually not only nation states, have cyber capabilities as part of their arsenal of offense capabilities, and they use it to gain intelligence, to gain operational overhead on top of their attackers. We talked about red buttons, we can talk about intelligence collecting, we can talk about just about anything. So I think the threat models today is crime versus espionage, and both of them have gone really, really good because of the cyber awareness, the high awareness of the organizations around the world that are target for attack. We can talk about nations, commercial, utilities, at every sector. Even the service providers are pushing cybersecurity really hard. They call it privacy, but eventually it's business motivations. It is privacy, but I think the first thing is business motivations. And another thing that we see is actually the proliferation of capabilities. If you examine like a key incidents that happen, over time, you see that there is a lot of resemblance or a lot of inspiration from nation states capabilities.
Right.
WannaCry is an amazing attack. The end state was ransomware to collect money. But what we know that over time that the Koreans have used shadow brokers loot that they stole from the NSA. One of the loot was how was it called? There was
internal blue.
Internal blue.
And double pulsar.
Exactly. So they used like really high level espionage, nation state, threat actor vulnerability. And they basically made it worldwide.
Weaponized it. Yeah.
Now everyone can use these capabilities. And that was a bad thing. The good thing is that actually all of the companies were aware of that, and there was a race to patch. Log4j is actually another really nice thing that you can see today that didn't happen in the past, in the sense that there is a huge vulnerability that have a mega effect on just about anything that runs on the web, in the internet, and on-prem in organizations. And there was like a race between people who utilize this vulnerability and the patch movement to do it. So it's crime versus espionage, and the characteristic of both is quite the same.
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting model, because if you look at it from, the techniques being used to get into your business are generally going to be the same between the two. But then the espionage mission is a tough mission, because the longer you remain inside an organization, the more likely you are to get detected, right? So it's once that initial exploit has gotten you inside, espionage will tend to look for documents of interest, communications of interest, whatever the target is of the espionage. Whereas the cyber criminals will quickly go through and try to steal as much of your data as possible and then encrypt it. So I think you're right. I think the threat models initially start very similar and then sort of branch off. Obviously, we've talked a little bit about Russia. Let's talk now a little bit about Chinese actors. It seems like they've been quite quiet in recent weeks and months. That's not to say they've stopped their activities, but I guess the focus has been elsewhere. What are you seeing in terms of Chinese threat actors' behaviors?
So that's a very good question. I think it is always about the motivation. So the fact that, there is a war going on between Russia and Europe, and actually the Western world, and the very visual aspect of the war is the horrible things that we see every day done in Ukraine, and the bombings and everything. There is a more silent war around finance and cyber. So I think China, first of all, China is active. It's engaging with Russia, not on the cyber level, on the commercial procurement and financial aspects of things. So you see clearly that she's taking side in the aspect that you will tell Russia, never mind the West, we can help you. So it's building the alliance as part of the outcome of the war. Cyber-wise, I think actually that everyone is assessing and expecting what's going on, because China is known for using cyber and actually being really blunt about it, like saying, okay, well, this is us, this is what we do, we're good. And Iran is using cyber capabilities as well. North Korea is using cyber capabilities as well. So I guess everyone is examining how the world is reacting to Russia's aggressive attacks and taking notes. So I don't think we can assess today what will be the outcome, but in many ways, China and all of the other nation states, threat actors that want to attack the West are actually taking notes, studying, and understand. And there is a new border that is being designed as we speak, of how much will the world be tolerant to malicious cyber activities on all levels. And this is an outcome of this war.
Yeah, and it's interesting because you did bring up a couple of other protagonists with North Korea, who's been making rhetoric, has been saying quite a bit and firing off missiles, obviously destabilizing. You're right, though. I think Iran has been very controlled and constrained in the last little while, which is good news. I mean, obviously, they would like to get back to the negotiating table and have sanctions removed from their country. So I feel like this could be a very good period of time as people realize that we need to kind of move beyond this protagonistic approach that nations have taken to one each other when there's mutual benefit. I think the other interesting tactic change that is worth pointing out is that Russia did launch a number of precision cyber strikes at Ukraine, and they seem to not have been particularly effective. I remember Microsoft within 2 or 3 hours had reversed engineered a wiper attack that was meant to target Ukrainian national critical infrastructure, and there was some speculation that Belarus has also conducted cyber attacks on behalf of Russia. What are your thoughts on this sort of like attribution challenge that we have, where one Belarusian can impersonate APT-28 and then all of a sudden conduct offensive cyber operations looking like a different protagonist?
So in many cases, I think, first of all, it depends on who is the victim.
Right.
Because if the victim is, you have different types of victim. You have like the innocent bystander that runs a business or holds sensitive information, and is doing it by himself or some kind of a hosting service. That's one victim. If the victim is an organization that runs in the public cloud and is actually backed by the security capabilities of the big companies, so that's another use case. And today, when you think about how to approach and attack your victim, one of the things that I guess you need to consider is what is the platform that is running on, and what will happen if I attack him, the victim, on that platform ecosystem. So as you mentioned, when Microsoft analyzed and reversed the Russian effort, the wiper attack that they are trying to conduct, the victim maybe was Ukraine, but Microsoft was the big player. And we talked about it before, in the sense that it is really, really complex today to work in the internet, in the environments, because you have so many interests and so many players that are moving around that they're not part of your attack, but they will be affected by it, and they actually see prestige in showing you off.
Yeah.
So I think that's an amazing time. Now, offensive cyber, it's a very sensitive topic, and we need to, maybe be careful on that discussion, because different companies around the world supplying this kind of services, and it's always a mess.
Yeah, that's definitely true.
It's always a mess. I had a commander in the unit. One of the commanders always he had this sentence like, "When you play with mud, you get dirty."
Yeah, that's very true.
So, offensive cyber is cyber weapons. It's a weapons like any other weapon, and we need to make sure that there are strict rules and ethics about it. But the method of an hackback, meaning that someone attacked you, now you want to attack him, back, and actually tell him, I know it's you, you know it's me. Please, let's not go down that path. I'm slapping you now because you slapped me. Now let's finish that. So I think that's another method that we actually starting to see in the crime world as well. I'm not talking about the espionage there. It's like, you know, a huge gameplay that goes between nation states all over the world. So the attribution today is far more easier than what it used to be, because again, cyber awareness is very, very high. The forensics technique, the threat intelligence that I guess you're going to elaborate on more later is highly developed. We collect data around the world. The actors that you deal with are not only the victims, the attacker, but all the players on the game, the big companies, the nation states, actually the ministries. Today, every country has their national cyber directorate. We have it in Israel. I guess you have it in the UK. I know they have it in the US, and they share information between them. It's an alliances. So the attribution today is far more easy than what it used to be, and it is attached with some kind of a hackback capabilities in many cases. So I guess that's a new game.
Definitely.
That has unwritten rules. Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, I was going to say we're finding that we've built this thing, this internet thing, this giant, almost living organization. But you're right, the rules depend on what country you're in and what country you're operating in terms of, you know, what you can and what you can't do online. And there's some countries that have put themselves at a huge disadvantage to conduct any sort of like digital self-defense, right? Which is really what you're talking about, where if somebody takes a swipe at you, you're empowered to be able to take a swipe back and say, okay, you know, let's de-escalate. You proved your point, I've proved my point, you know, we'll separate and go our separate ways, right? There is some, I think, merit in that approach. You know, Anonymous has taken that to the next level with, you know, hacktivism, basically generally pointing its capabilities at Russia. You know, the Ukrainians are doing exciting things to keep their country safe, but at the same time, they're certainly probing and attacking Russia as well. Anything that they can find to embarrass Putin, but also to get the truth about the war, you know, combating disinformation, which is sort of like a really great way of segueing into, there's the bits and bytes type of wars going on, but there's also a war of ideas going on. Some of it, you know, false information that we saw about COVID, potentially false or potentially confirmed information about war crimes in Russia and Ukraine. The information war is sort of like a cyber war, but it's a bit different, isn't it? We're talking about troll farms. We're talking about malicious actors on social media to attack, you know, brands and organizations and people and the truth.
So, Ian, I think it will be interesting to see what is happening with the digital twins trends, because one of the things that we see is that the digital twin concept is really gaining momentum, in the sense that different organizations from different sectors in the markets, different market sectors, energy, manufacturing, utilities, communication, academy, health, are pursuing the concept of digital twin because they see that they can actually solve a lot of physical problems with not investing all of the efforts, because they're building the digital twin. Now, like every new technology that come up to the theater, the security people come and say, okay, guys, now this is the new highly desired target, because in order to steal or understand how Tesla makes its cars, or how do you build this plane, or how do you check this vaccine, you don't need to disassemble it and steal a car or whatever. You just need to get the digital twin, the digital blueprint of the product, and just open it and see what's going on in front of your eyes. So I think that trend of digital twin is, on one hand, an amazing advancement and a huge opportunity that will kick every market, every sector that it involves in forward fast. And in the same time, it introduces a huge threat.
Yeah.
It's not a new threat, but the outcome of the threat is huge. It's amazing. I would like to hear your words about it.
Well, I'm going to go broadly talking about this, because this is what is essentially becoming the virtualization of large, complex systems, that we now have created a digital version of it to try out different scenarios and different impacts over time. So to give you an idea, if you have a wind farm, you have a virtual wind farm, and as the wind farm encounters various, different types of, oceanographic type of events, those events are recorded and applied to the digital model in this sort of the same realm, if you will. So the attack surface then is, obviously it's going to be really tough to go out in a rowboat and steal a physical wind farm, but you could steal the technology and all of the information about how it functions and how it works from that digital representation of it, right? And so what we're going to see is, because we're using these types of technologies and slowly advancing towards, things like quantum computing, we're going to see the focus of espionage and of cyber criminal groups targeting these digital models, if you will, of these complex systems, because the data becomes really precious, and that it's that data that actually is the important intellectual property that's being generated, right? So right now, we're all confronted across the globe with global climate change and the potential for global climate warming. We have models that we're trying to use in order to figure out what is the impact of that on crops, what is the impact on water in certain regions. Well, that information can be monetized very easily, because you can now use it to hedge on commodities if that model isn't secured. You could use it to run a number of different scenarios, some of them, weaponized, but others more to the point of, instead of doing these years and years and years of research, taking the research puts your nation state, your program, even your commercial enterprise massively ahead. And, the difficulty, like you pointed out with the Tesla, of figuring out how a Tesla works would take years and years and years to reverse engineer. But if you get your hands on the digital twin or the virtual version of it, it's very easy to reverse engineer it. So I think you're right in that this intellectual property, these digital representations of these physical systems that we have, are going to be a target for nation states, but also for cyber criminals. Absolutely.
I think another aspect of the digital twin revolution, security-wise, is the sense that once you have the digital twin copy in your hand, you can find rather easily and really fast the weak spot of what you that you can manipulate and attack. So it's not only about the data, the intellectual property, the advancement, you know, that you can gain only by having data that someone else worked on for many years, but it's a rather straightforward, easy access to very sensitive information that you can manipulate and see how can you attack and harm any industry or market sector, the digital twin that you have in your hand. So it's actually becoming a clear intelligence capability.
And we've seen this play out rather dramatically with the Lapus gang, who, you know, broke into NVIDIA. And right now, you know, when you talk about the digital twin, I feel like we're talking about source code. We're talking about the very things that make the video card work, right? And that's worth a ton of money. But you're also right in that within that code, there might be vulnerabilities that a person in possession of it can then exploit. This seems to be what happened, although there's nobody, I think, has drawn a complete straight line between the SolarWinds hack, the Microsoft source code, and then a series of 0 days against on-premise Exchange. So there is sort of like maybe an intangible link to a series of unfortunate events that then ended up, you know, being weaponized by a threat actor and taking over a number of Exchange systems to ransomware them. But I think, you know, the source code is a really interesting issue because, especially for companies that have been in business for years and years and years, they might not have been practicing all of the cybersecurity best practices because it's been evolving, and they have to make their product backward compatible. So there are going to be vulnerabilities that can't be taken out of the code because that's just the way it works, right? Especially if you're trying to, you know, go back and secure ancient operating systems. You know, they're not going to do that. They want to put in the new features and everything like that, but they have to maintain that backwards compatibility, which then, you know, could lead to exploitation for sure.
So I think the connection that you just made, maybe I can articulate it differently, but I really agree with that, is like digital twin is part of the new supply chain types of attacks that we are going to see. Now, the point about Lapsus is, first of all, there still needs to be, they're conducting the investigation, and eventually they will publish how are they hacking all of these organizations, which is they're an amazing role. But the fact is that they're putting everything online, and now that this is part of a proliferation of the you know, of the data and the network offense and the cyber offense tool, in the sense that anyone can download or buy or get NVIDIA's code, analyze it, and over time, it can build the tool to manipulate data science and AI capabilities, which are heavily rely on NVIDIA technologies.
That's right.
So the series of unfortunate events that you just discussed on, we are only at the bridge of it. And this is exactly the alignment that we talked about, cybercrime and espionage, and the sense of why do we do the cyber attacks? The ransomware, the first level is let's get money fast. It's still there, but it's not the case. It's all about the high level of capabilities that everyone is targeting everyone in a very, very, very sophisticated way, and in long-term planning and execution.
Yeah, and you know, I made the point that just because somebody has the NVIDIA code doesn't necessarily mean they can go into the video gaming industry tomorrow, but it does pave the way to create knockoff type of devices, and bring them to market in months as opposed to years and years of R&D. So it's a huge economic loss, but you're absolutely right in pointing out that, hey, looking at the future, this could be a whole new attack surface because of the dependencies of, things like AI and artificial intelligence on that particular code base. So I think that's a fascinating observation. I also think that, for companies now, they really need to start figuring out how they can protect the digital twin and the source code and the other intellectual property, because it seems like they're doing not particularly good job of it, especially in recent months. This is a really interesting discussion to have because it's one of the first ones that I've had where we're actually thinking about what the future of crime and espionage looks like. So really great points.
Yeah. Going further with your remarks, I think that the defensive posture need to be redesigned because everyone has the same capabilities. Everyone has their antivirus and EDRs and XDRs and firewalls and network anomaly detection and encryptions and VPN and firewall and microsegmentations and
the list goes on and on.
The works,
yeah.
And yet everyone is getting hacked.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you see, and I'm not blaming the victim. Really, I think today many CISOs have a stack of defense capabilities, and moreover, they have the awareness of the organization and the willingness of the organizations to put efforts and fundings in cyber defense. Yet everyone gets hacked. So I think a new paradigm needs to be introduced. First of all, in many cases, as we talked about the digital cyber twins, the main threat is the business logic, okay, like the crown jewels of the network that make your business up and running in any sector.
Mm-hmm.
And the sensitive / valuable data, in the sense that I have as an organization a unique data that
Mm-hmm.
if it will be available will harm me on a commercial level, on the financial level, on the privacy level, or the whatever. Now, all of the security mechanisms that we have today are familiar with that and are working all across the network to make sure that the assets are safe. We at Hub Security are introducing a targeted capability to secure the business logic or the sensitive data. We call it confidential compute. It's a secure compute. It's building a targeted, hardware-based, privileged access immune suite of solution that will actually guard your sensitive assets. So it's not replacing anything, but it adds a huge level of complexity, and a very high level security solution. We call it the agile defensive posture, in the fact that we're saying you can play on all the court, yet you need to make sure that your precious assets, your crown jewels, are very, very highly secured. And once someone is in your network, that's what is going to target. And we see it time after time after time after time. You talked about Lepsus, we can talk about WannaCry, we can talk about Orion, the SolarWinds. We can review attacks all around the world. Eventually, it's all about the crown jewels.
That's right. Yeah. Well, that's what I love about hub security is you're looking not at what the problem is today, it's where that problem is going to be tomorrow or, far into the future. And I think there's, like you said, I think there's not only a business need for this, but the paradigm of, firewall and moat and, castle walls just is not working anymore when we're trying to collaborate over vast distances. To build anything like a robot or a car, you have hundreds of different suppliers and contributors, and monitoring access to confidential data, giving them enough data that they can create what you need, but at the same time, you're not giving away the entire crown jewels of your company to have, one of your partners now go into business against you, right? So I think, that's a great place to sort of leave it and talk about, it's a great place to leave it and just kind of say that it's been absolutely my pleasure to be part of this discussion and to look at what the future looked like, because most of the time we're just talking about cyber attacks of the past.
Yeah, first of all, thank you very much. I think your insights will go far and above and beyond this discussion. And
thank you.
We should talk again.
Yeah, definitely.
The thing about cyber, it's like many ways the stock market. You can't predict anything about the future, looking at the past. No matter how good you were or how down-performing you were, eventually it's a new day, a new surprise, and we need to be ready.
It always is. we can always bet on that.
Okay, and that's coming from an intelligence guy, so now I'm really worried. Okay, thank you a lot, Ian.